Before we get into the show, I want to give you a content warning. The story on this episode deals with mental illness and suicide. If you or someone you know is in need, the 24-hour crisis hotline number is 988.
I just flew across the country to meet someone I have known for 8 hours. And of course, on the ride home, I realized not only have I ruined our tradition of not going to the steakhouse on Christmas Eve, I also forgot to buy my family Christmas presents.
That's Al Lutz from Plattsburgh. They told that story live on stage at the HOWL Grand Slam at Pickens Hall in Hewelton in 2017. And on today's episode of the show, Make Every Second Count. From NCPR and the Adirondack Center for Writing, this is the HOWL Holiday Special. True stories, no notes, told live on stage in the North Country. I'm Ethan Shantie. When you're a kid, the holidays are a special time. It's not just presents and seeing family, it's also about snowball fights and sledding and snow days. It's truly a magical thing. But for a lot of people, when they get older, it can become a really difficult time. And at this time of the year, I'm always thinking about my dad, so I wanted to share this story with you. We didn't have a lot of dogs growing up, but enough that I can match each one to a distinct part of my life. Tanya, a golden retriever who would always growl at my babysitter's husband, and Katie, a little labradoodle who one time got stuck in the pool and swam all night long. They were the grade school dogs. In high school, we had Doofy. He was this gigantic black German shepherd who would, without fail, smack his head on the underside of the kitchen table every time he stood up. I think Doofy was my dad's favorite. And then when I was getting into the end of high school and into college, we had Reno. She was a golden lab who was just about the sweetest dog I think that I've ever met. Well, after Reno had to be put down, my dad was kind of done with dogs for a long, long time. I think he just didn't have it in him anymore to lose the things that he cared about. By his mid-60s, he'd lost most of his friends and family, and he'd become one of those people that was reading the obit section of the paper every day. Eventually, though, he did start talking about getting a new dog. He'd call me on the phone and say, "Hey, get on your computer and see if anyone around here has German Shepherds." And occasionally I would find one, but he'd always come up with a reason not to do it. Well, at the end of 2018, my dad had been going to the hospital a lot. First, he was having problems with his eyes. Then he had some stomach issues. His liver was damaged. It became kind of a long list. And I decided, come hell or high water, I'm getting this guy a dog. It took a while, but I was finally able to track down somebody, just a few miles from my parents actually, who was selling German Shepherd puppies. I got some family to chip in, and Christmas morning I gave my dad a box filled with a new dog collar, a new dish, some toys, and treats. The puppy was still a little too young to leave its mother at that point, but she would be ready a few weeks after Christmas time. I wanted to be able to show my family who couldn't be there his reaction, so I started filming as he opened the box.
Yeah, that's good. The word the puppy goes with it.
Coming in 2 weeks.
Puppy is so... I tell you what, he made my Christmas.
My dad was not a crier, but he bawled his eyes out that Christmas morning. And when the dog finally did arrive, Dad named him Cooper, and they became friends for the time that they had left. Early in 2019, my dad was diagnosed with lung cancer. He didn't want to go through with chemo. He'd already watched his brother and his sister go through that, and they had a horrible time in their last few months. So in the second week of June, he went in for surgery, and that was that. He spent the next 2 weeks in a coma, and on June 25th, he died in Saranac Lake. 6 months later, to the day, was Christmas. And it was my first Christmas away from my parents' home. Actually, I was about as far away from home as you could possibly get. Christmas morning, I woke up in the desert in Phoenix, Arizona. That's where my mom had moved to live with my brother. And it didn't much feel like Christmas that year. Actually, it really hasn't felt much like Christmas since. And then I finally understood why the holidays can be so tough for people. I didn't know it, of course, but that was going to be our last Christmas together. How could I have known? And that's just the point, isn't it? You never know the last time you'll see somebody, the last time you get to have Thanksgiving together, your last birthday, your last Christmas. So if you're lucky enough to have those people in your life still, I hope that you'll make sure that every single day counts. Al Lutz was kind enough to share this next story about the last Christmas that they got to spend with their dad. Here they are, live on stage at the 2017 HOWL Grand Slam in Hewelton.
This is a story about Christmas in my family. And we don't have a whole lot of holiday traditions. We have 3. One is that we always put out the same neon Kmart tablecloth for birthdays. The second is we always go to my grandma's house in August. And the third is we always go to the same steakhouse on Christmas Eve for dinner. Always the same waiter, Tom. He serves us, usually wearing the same candy cane tie. Very nice guy. My dad always has a few too many scotches. And then we go home. And this is a story about how I kind of ruined one of those traditions. And I think you can figure out which one it is. But in order to talk about this Christmas, I have to rewind a little bit to October of 2012, when I met who I thought was my soulmate. And I didn't expect to meet Charlie. He had kind of crashed this little reunion I was planning with some of my friends from college. And he was the kind of guy who could do math equations in his head, but really couldn't tell you what day of the week it was. Totally my type. So and he was from Montana, and we met totally by happenstance. I was living in Maine that fall, and we kept up a correspondence. We talked through email and Skype, and if any of you have corresponded with someone for a long time over email and Skype, it's really easy to fall in love. And that's because you can kind of present your best self, right? And they can present their best self, and you can edit emails, which is great. A lot less pressure than conversation. But around Thanksgiving, so about a month and a half into our communication, I decided that I wanted to see him again. So I said, hey, I'm going to fly out to Montana to see you. And he said, no. Don't fly to see me in Montana. Let's both go somewhere we've never been before. Let's go to Seattle. And I said, okay. So, always one for an adventure. I booked a flight to Seattle, and the return flight was on Christmas Eve. And I thought, it'll be fine. I'll get home in time. We'll be able to make it to the butcher block. I'll get my salad because I'm a vegetarian, but it doesn't matter. So I made Charlie promise me, I'm like, listen, when we get to Seattle, I better see you in the airport waiting for me. He's like, oh, yeah, of course, I'll be there. So I get to the airport, and he is not waiting for me. And I think to myself, I just flew across the country to meet someone I have known for 8 hours. And I'm also going to ruin 33% of the Lutz family holiday traditions. This is great. Definitely worth it. But it turns out he had been in a car accident on his way from Montana, driving in the snow through the mountains, right? So he spent all night in a truck stop and drove starting at 1 o'clock the next morning, and he met me at our hostel in Seattle, and we had this whirlwind romance, right? 10 days in our own blissful little bubble, falling in love, gallivanting around the Pacific Northwest in the middle of December, which surprisingly is not the number one tourist destination. Very cold and rainy. And by the time we said goodbye, I was just high on this feeling of falling in love, right? He was everything I imagined he would be through emails and more. And because I was kind of high on this feeling of love, right, my plane touched down in Burlington, and I got off my flight. It was around dinner time, 6:30, and my parents were waiting for me. There was my mom, there was my dad, and for the first time, I kind of looked at my dad, and I saw that he'd gotten a lot older since the last time I had seen him, which was really only a few weeks earlier at Thanksgiving. And he was walking with a cane, and, he had been struggling a lot with mental health issues. And for some reason, in that moment, I kind of saw him as a person who was getting sick. And I think it was because I had had that 10 days of magic, absurdity with Charlie that I was able to really see my dad in a new light and have patience with him. And of course, on the ride home, I realized not only have I ruined our tradition of not going to the steakhouse on Christmas Eve, I also forgot to buy my family Christmas presents. Yeah, this story does not paint me in a very flattering light. But we get home and we do our Christmas Eve dinner a little more subdued at home. We all go to bed, and the next morning we wake up and we open presents, or I guess my family opened IOUs from me. But I promised all of them that when I got back to Maine, I would mail them their presents as soon as possible, or as soon as I got them. And the last present I opened was from my mom, who's sitting in the back, and it was a little yellow pouch in the shape of a banana, and it was the game Bananagrams. And if any of you have ever played Bananagrams, you know it's very fast-paced, very competitive. It's like Scrabble, you build your own crossword. And my dad was never really one for board games unless they involved world domination and lasted for 5 days. But I looked at him and I said, I see you've all played Risk as well. Or Settlers of Catan. But I looked at my dad, who normally I kind of did my best to avoid very different opinions politically, very hard to have a conversation. But I kept thinking about that moment the night before in the airport when he was walking with his cane, and I thought, here's my dad, and I owe it to him to be patient and to have this moment and to play this game. And I guess my Christmas present to him was that I didn't keep score. But I said, you know what, let's help each other. Let's build words together. Let's just have fun. Let's just play a fun game. So we played Bananagrams at my dining room table, and it just felt very sweet, and it was the first time we really connected as people in a long time, in years. And I flew out back to Maine on New Year's Day, gave my dad a hug, said I love you, told my mom I loved her, and I said, of course, I'll mail my presents as soon as I get back. Well, I was working at a school at the time, and, you know, the school year picked up again, and things got really busy, and I never ended up getting my family Christmas presents because I always figured I would have time. You know, I'll find the perfect present, right? But it turns out I didn't really have time because a few days before Valentine's Day, I got a call from my mom saying that my dad had lost his battle with mental illness and he had taken his life. And I felt an incredible amount of guilt and shame thinking about that tradition, right, that we hadn't had. That was our last Christmas together. The gifts I hadn't bought. But then I remembered, no, we spent time together. And even though from the outside looking in, a little game of Bananagrams doesn't seem like a big deal, right? It's something really small. But those are the moments that the holidays are really about. It's not about presents. In some ways, it's not even really about tradition. It's about spending time with someone and loving them and being patient and forgiving them and connecting. And I guess moving forward, when I think to myself, oh, I'll have time, I always catch that little voice in the back of my head and think, no, you might not have time. Send that card, buy that present, say I love you, book that trip across the country, you know? And never, ever undervalue the time that you're spending with loved ones. Thank you.
That's it for this episode of The Howl. Thanks to Al for the story, and thanks to you for being with us. And make sure this holiday season you make every moment count. If you or someone you know is in need, the 24-hour crisis hotline number is 988. Before we're done here, I just want to take a moment to thank all of you who have listened, who have followed the show, who have reached out to me personally, who have told a friend about what we're doing. I love hosting this show. I love that I get to do this for work, and I love being a part of a community of fine people who loves the art of storytelling. I really, really appreciate you being along with me for the ride, and seriously, if you want to talk about this story or share your own, you can reach out to me. Send me a message to ethan@ncpr.org. And all of us at NCPR who make this show possible want to send a sincere thank you to you for supporting our effort and bringing you great stories and conversations. Before the year is out, please consider making a donation to keep shows like this strong in the coming year. Head to ncpr.org/give. And thanks. The Howl is written, produced, and edited by me, Ethan Shantie, with editorial supervision by David Summerstein. Doyle Dean is our production manager, Bill Hanel is our digital guy, and Caitlin Kelly handles our social media. Music on this episode is by famous letter writer of Plattsburgh. The Howl is a co-production of NCPR and the Adirondack Center for Writing in Saranac Lake. You can find more episodes and support the program, plus find out when we're going to be telling stories in your town by visiting ncpr.org/howl. This is NCPR, North Country Public Radio.